everybody. Welcome to InPsightRadio. I'm your host, Danielle Egnew, and you are a fly on the wall to everywhere. And hopefully your everywhere isn't too scrambled or too crazy. Wow, man, 2020 is the year that just keeps on giving, isn't it? I am never surprised by 2020, and it is the year of evolution. So we are seeing so many just eruptive changes all over the place. It has been something else. I mean, 2020, like I said, it's the year that just keeps on giving. It's the year of evolution, and everything is evolving so quickly. And because of that, we're seeing a lot of fear all over the world. We're seeing fear of change just exploding all over the place. And we're seeing the justification of change all over the place. And we're seeing the resistance to change all over the place. Big changes. You know, very recently, Associate Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, and she was hanging on there trying to make it through till the next president, whomever that was going to be, took their seat. And it's very fascinating because I've been looking at the effect of RGB passing has had on many people in the nation, and even folks who consider themselves to be more of a conservative bent were really touched by the fact and upset and saddened by the fact that this very accomplished woman died and went on. And here we have a country that's trying to mourn and be respectful for a figure who's been there for a very long time. And it's so interesting to watch how there is such a panic to try to reclaim the past right now, that even right now, I mean, as we speak, we have an executive branch of government that's trying to cram through a new nominee. And of course, that'll remain to see if that even happens. Yet the point of me bringing that up is not a political issue. It's to showcase how desperate the non-evolved time frame is to hang on to what it's got. As if another justice who may have a more conservative bent in the way that they look at the law is going to actually turn the clock backwards. I mean, and that's just not going to happen. I mean, no matter who gets appointed to the United States Supreme Court, the chances, when I look at the timelines, the chances that that justice would want to actually take it upon themselves to roll back laws, you know, on abortion and on same-sex marriage. And I mean, that would nobody really wants to start that kind of upheaval, or the people overthrowing things in the United States. No justice wants that. That's ridiculous. And at the heart of these justices, even though there are more liberal justices or more conservative justices, at the heart of these folks, they are judges. I mean, even Kavanaugh, who many people from a liberal viewpoint did not appreciate Brett Kavanaugh, and even Kavanaugh did not vote the way that President Trump wanted him to vote on a number of issues that were important to Trump. And Trump was mad about it. Yet at the very base of all of these individuals, they are a Supreme Court justice now. And people who go into real judging, I'm not talking about, necessarily the justice of the peace down in the bayou. I'm talking about the folks who really go up the district courts and whatnot. Most of those people, not all, but most of those people do have a wide regard for the law, even if they don't feel like that law reflects their personal beliefs. There's just a lot of change right now, a lot of change. And there's a lot that we're being asked to look at in our nation and in our world and in ourselves. And certainly looking at our place in the universe is very important, And our last podcast was on the folks from Sirius AB. And today's podcast is all about the folks from Arcturian and the Arctur and who they are and what they are and where they come from and why it's important that we talk about them today. And why am I transitioning from the Supreme Court to aliens? Well, first of all, that is kind of my style. Secondly, the reason that I'm transitioning from the level blind view, supposedly, of justice to the Arcturian is because we inherited a lot of our processes of observation from teachings from the folks from Arctur. And I'm not talking about our judicial system, but the whole idea that justice is blind and you present the facts and you work upon the facts. That is unequivocally such an Oturan thing. I mean, it's literally, it's nuts. So what I tell you about that is that we oftentimes here on the planet Earth refer to the folks from Otur, we refer to them as the Arcturians. Arcturians, they're from Arcturia. And that's, I would just say that's a general mispronunciation of their name when they've presented to me. And I ask them, where are you from? The best way I can formulate this word and reproduce it is Otur. And it's almost like a bird whistle and a rolling R at the end, Otur. And so it's an odd way to pronounce it. But the thing that's neat about these beings is that it's important to note that our galactic cousins, okay, whether they were from Oturan or they were from, or whether they were Oturan from Otur, or they were from Sirius AB, or no matter where they were from, many of our off-world cousins originated out of the Pleiades. Now, we know the Pleiades here on Earth. We know the Pleiades as the Seven Sisters, okay? So if you can think about the Pleiades being the Subaru logo, there are many, many worlds out in the Pleiades. It's not just one, and there are big, giant stars out there. As we talked last podcast, a lot of these big stars create wrinkles in space or stargates. For lack of a better word, that's super cheesy, but I don't know what else to call them. I mean, they're space folds that our off-world cousins travel through, okay? And they have to do with gravity waves, they have to do with the gravitational fabric of the universe, which is deeply affected by very large gravitational bodies like stars. So when we're talking about the Pleiades, okay, way back in the day, when we think about how humanity spread out, humanity started in its earliest form in the Fertile Crescents of Africa, you know, and these really intense tribal beings that were very small in stature and sort of looked a whole lot like little monkey people, back in, 300, 400,000 years ago, in the evolution of all these different hominins, people ventured out of where they successfully reproduced and were able to get their villages going. So we can trace different hominin strains back to the continent of Africa, which is, and actually, if we trace some of those strains, we can trace them all the way down to the Aboriginal cultures also in Australia, before all the continents broke apart and rolled all the different directions they went into. I mean, we had different life evolving all over the place. So in the same way that humans or hominins just expanded outward from a main area that developed life, so did our galactic cousins. And the Pleiades seems to be a place, from what I can gather from these beings, of basically where kind of everybody started out millions of years ago. And then we talked about the folks from Sirius AB being the adventurers and getting out there among them. And the folks from Otur, they also originally came from that Pleiadian area, yet we're talking maybe 1 million and some odd years ago. I mean, this wasn't like they just got on a Winnebago and headed over to Otur. So from our perspective, if we were trying to figure out where Otur was, then what I would tell you is the way they've explained it to me is if you look at Orion, the constellation Orion, right? And everybody knows Orion. And everybody knows where Orion's belt is. So if you go from the center star of Orion's belt over to the right-hand side, his right-hand star, then if you go between those two stars from our vantage point, because obviously those stars aren't actually right next to each other in space, it just looks like they are from where we're at. And if you go right through those two stars and you keep going in that direction, it's not that the planet is right over there, it's that the entry point, the vortex, the stargate, the space wrinkle is through those two large stars in that area. And when they show me where exactly the planet is, I mean, you can see the actual galaxy, I think with the Hubble telescope. I mean, it's out there. It's way out there. However, they use a lot of the same jumping technology as do our friends from Sirius. And that doesn't surprise me all that much because if we think about it, they all ventured from the Pleiades millions of years ago. So you have to keep in mind, gang, that these off-world races, they're millions of years older, millions and billions of years older than we are. I mean, it just gets to a point where there's so many of them that are so much older than the human species. So, Arcturian, to be Arcturian, they have a very interesting way of looking at society. And like, it really kind of puts to shame our consciousness here on Earth, okay? Because if you look at us on Earth, we have a kind of a hierarchy system here. There are humans, there are mammals, there are single-cell organisms, there are trees, there are rocks, there is wind, there is water, there are fish. We tend to categorize every single thing that lives on Earth. And in part, that's due to the fact that, again, you got to keep in mind, gang, we are such a young species comparatively. So you know how like little 3-year-olds, have you ever watched a 3-year-old play with their toys? And they walk up to you and they have maybe 4 or 5 toys that they're dinking around with. And they hold up one and they say, block. And you say, whoa, that's a really neat block. I like the letter A. And they hold up another one and say, doll. And you say, oh, I love your little dolly. It's cute. And they hold up another one and say, ball. And they keep doing this. They're so impressed with themselves that they know what their toys are called. That's kind of how we look, you guys, to everybody else in the universal family. You know, we're all banana, dog, tree, human. You know, we're so excited to be able to label everything here on Earth. And it's actually funny because even our science, we're so excited with our science. We discover something that pre-existed us in nature, whatever it is, gravity, okay? And then we take a Post-it note and we write gravity on it and we stick it to gravity and we say, gravity! It's hilarious. So our off-world cousins find it fascinating that not only do we label absolutely everything that comes from our planet, yet we give it a ranking of either more important or less important. And then on top of that, we're very excited to own things. And these are 3 things that if you're Arcturian, you're not really going to relate with, because the folks from Arctur, okay, are a heavily telepathic species. So are we, but we like to pretend we're not, and we blame it all on coincidence and a funny gut feeling. And the weirdest thing happened the other day. I really felt like my mom was going to call me, and then she called me. It was so weird. Well, no, it's not weird, because we're a heavily Bluetoothed species living on a giant electromagnet that actually transmits a ton of shared data to all of our electromagnetic organs called the brain. So it's not miraculous and it's not a weird one-off thing, but we're just not ready to accept that about ourselves. So we're going to talk about the Arcturian instead. And on Arctur, the whole planet that is inhabited anyway is built with all the structures are built with a specific alloy that allows the transmission of energy. And upon looking at, I've never been there, obviously, yet I deal with the Arcturian with many different exercises that I'll get to in a minute. And they've shown me their planet. They've shown me through mental exercises, through dream time, through visions, all the different ways that we communicate on that extrasensory level. This group of beings has shown me where they're from. And it's freaking cool. And it's very interesting to me because when you read the Bible, there are some really interesting analogies that remind me a lot of the Arcturian landscape. And I'm just going to leave that with you for right now. Yet, when you look at the alloy that these buildings are made out of on this planet, I want you to think of everything being made out of a brick that's sort of a gray gold color. And if you've ever seen fool's gold or iron pyrite, that's what I'm talking about. Sometimes it can be sort of a silvery gold color or a gray gold color. That's exactly what this looks like. Now, I couldn't tell you what it was made out of. It's a composite mineral that they put together, or I don't think they actually mine it. I think they have different ways of extracting it from their soil and their rocks. Yet we'd look at it as mining, and then these bricks are put together and these whole entire systems are created. These buildings, roads, everything that is constructed is made out of this particular, I'm going to call it an alloy. But really, more accurately, it's a substance. It's not all metal, and there are high crystalline contents in this substance. And the substance transmits energy and data. And one of the coolest things about the Arcturian culture is that they're okay with being telepathic and sharing energies. They don't see it as a breach of privacy. They believe that they can be individuals within a collective that experiences collective thought. Now, I don't mean hive mind. I mean collective thought. And they have beings that have differing jobs and all kinds of things. And just because they are a telepathically connected species does not mean that they are frickin' Mrs. Kravitz busybodies. And why is that? Well, I'll tell you why it is. It's because, again, you got to remember these beings are millions of years ahead of us. So what somebody else is doing with their sex life really isn't that interesting, Nobody's really trying to embezzle money because a commerce system doesn't exist on Otur. They've gone way past the need for, I got my shells and you have your beans and we're going to trade them for these goats and these chickens. They go way past this, okay? So they don't have the weird reality TV creepy Snoopy need that we have in any way, shape, or form. And the Arcturian have really heavily engaged humanity in ways that are quite different from our Sirius friends. Now, Sirius AB folks, like I talked about, they are the terraformers. They are the architects. They like to build the pyramids, and they like to build power generators on the earth. And they had a little bit of a, okay, if you want to call me God, that's fine, problem for a while. However, the Arcturian has never had that type of relationship with humanity. And since they've been coming here, they've been teachers. And if you really want to read a little bit more about this group of beings' influence on humanity, study Chinese history. Because in the Chinese history, they have ancient 8,000, 10,000-year-old scrolls. You got to remember, China has been writing and keeping histories for far longer than the Western world, okay? And in these Chinese histories, what we see, especially this one particular story of a ship that crashed into the sea off of the coast of China, a spaceship. And out of that spaceship came a woman, and she was carrying with her a box. And she wouldn't let anyone open the box. That was her special thing. And she would privately communicate with this wooden box and then come out and bring great teachings to the people of China. Now, what's interesting is that if you look off the coast of China, you're going to see some humongous structures, and those structures are really old. Those structures are, they estimate under the water, maybe 150,000 years old, and they are massive, massive stone blocks, just like you see in the pyramids, except these are underwater. And of course, now they're all covered in coral and all the edges are rubbed off. And so there's a lot of people that are saying, oh, no, these are naturally occurring structures. These are naturally occurring angles from the currents. And I don't buy that for a minute, because if you look at them, it's pretty obvious they're buildings. Okay. Talk about the ultimate gaslighting. No, it's just a bunch of currents and a few really creative sharks that made those down there. And okay. So if you look at the Chinese culture, what you find are, again, not only this documentation of spaceships, if you will, crashing into the water and this woman coming out, but she also had grand teachings. Nobody ever found out what was in the box. And the fascinating thing is, when I was talking to the folks from Otur, I asked them, where were the first people that you began to really interface with? And they showed me that it was that eastern part of the world. And I asked them why it was the eastern part of the world. And they indicated that at the time, that grouping of people was the most civilized. They were the most chill. I mean, Genghis Khan wasn't chill, but just overall at that time in the world, I mean, they were bathing, they were riding, they weren't just throwing rocks at one another. So they felt like that culture had the best shot of bringing forward the best traits that humanity had to offer at the time. And so from Otur, we have the tenets of Taoism. All things are equal. Nothing holds a place greater than another thing, right? That's Taoism. And Taoism isn't a religion. It's a modality of being and a modality of thought. So if you think about this, if you think about what we were just talking about with the folks from Oturan, not really putting into a categorizing system, what's the most important thing on their planet? Is it people? Is it rocks? Is it natural resources? Is it this alloy that they somehow extract and make these buildings from? If we think about the fact that for them, everything is equal, then wow, does Taoism make sense, right? Listen to the trees and we're all one, and the water and the earth and the sky and the wind, we're all one. Welcome to Taoism. So we get our Taoist teachings that were handed down from this beautiful culture, this off-world culture that came to teach us about what it takes and who we are and what we're doing on the planet and with our relationship to the universe. Whereas the folks from Sirius AB were far more interested in teaching us about technologies, how to create pyramid generators. They were far more interested in helping us with structural elements. The folks from Otur were far more interested in teaching us consciousness elements, okay, spiritual elements, which is really, really fascinating. And so if you think about Buddhism also, Chinese Buddhism, which came from that part of the world, we really start to see that within all of that, there is, again, there is no self. Self doesn't exist. There is only the collective. And I always say I would make a terrible Buddhist because I have way too many boots to be a Buddhist. I see myself as a self, even though I know I'm connected, right? So what I would tell you is that with the way that this is all moving, especially in our development as human beings, okay? With Buddhism, which teaches us that there is no self and that we all are one, that is directly linked to the entire way that the Oturan society operates. So we were taught as human beings, these teachings were brought from the stars, from our off-world cousins out in Otur. They have contributed widely to a lot of the gene pool, just like the Sirius AB, the tall whites, contributed to a lot of the gene pool that we see in Caucasian folks. There's a lot of contribution from Oturan in Eastern cultures genetically. I mean, it's cool. I mean, when you get down and you break it down, human beings are mutts. We are galactic mutts mixed with the beings that naturally evolved here on the earth. I mean, we literally are just big mashups we're mutts. Earthlings are mutts. So when you go back and look at this, and it's not like I'm trying to make claims that any one ethnicity of people is an alien. That's not it. I'm saying every single being on Earth who happens to be human, well, not every single being, but I would say probably 98% of us have some sort of off-world DNA mixed in with us at this point, because it was the humans that had that little off-world push genetically that managed to rise up and extinct the other beings, or almost extinct. Some of them kept living and interbred with the new hybrid version of people. However, the Cro-Magnon man turned around and nearly wiped out the Neanderthal man. And there were some Neanderthals that persisted. And we do see some of that kind of mashup genealogy represented in certain people once in a while. It's kind of watered down all these years later. However, we are looking at really a lot of help from our off-world cousins to survive as a species. So the Arcturian, back to the Arcturian. If you go to their world, everything is made out of this funky alloy. I'll just call it an alloy, this composite. And everything is this goldish gray color. The streets, they are a fan of a pyramid-style building. And I don't mean as square as the pyramids from Sirius AB, okay? And I want you to remember the folks from Sirius and the folks from Arctur, all originally millions of years ago, came from the Pleiades. So we are talking some core design elements as well as just when you're dealing with architecture, there's certain structural elements that work, regardless. So the folks from Sirius AB had the more square, fat-based pyramids like we see in Giza. Then we go over to Arctur, and the Arcturian have much thinner pyramids. They're skinnier and they're taller, almost like towers with a fat bottom. And we see reflections of that same pyramid style in Thailand. You go to Angkor Wat in Thailand, and there are these funny pyramid tower things that are very ornately carved at Angkor Wat. But you know what I'm talking about? They're like, take a pyramid, but smush its base in and make it taller and make it flat on top. And oftentimes there might be something on the flat top, like a bell or a spire, but it's flat. Sometimes it's just flat. So this is a very common design style if you go to Arctur. Why? Why that shape? Why that size? Well, because keeping in mind that all of their structures, including the streets, including their homes, and their homes are oftentimes in these, I'll call them these squished together flat-topped pyramids, they all conduct energy. And so if this is a telepathic species, in the same way that we throw cell towers all over the place in our neighborhoods, okay, these beings have built out of a composite material that acts as an emulator of all the energy. Now, also keep in mind that the Arcturian, keep in mind that they also are Bluetoothed together as a species, much like human beings. The folks from Sirius AB, they have a little different makeup. They tend to really hyper Bluetooth with a small soul grouping that they're attached to. So that might be 5 or 6 of them attached to one soul group. Yet the folks from Arctur, they are all collectively hooked up like humans are. So we've got a little bit more in common with them than we do with the folks from Sirius AB, even though we share more of the physiology from the folks from Sirius AB with the bulby prefrontal cortex and all this. And really, in fairness to the folks on Arctur, they also have that more bulby prefrontal cortex. Their heads are more flat. They have a less angular face. Their face plane is a little more flat across. They do not have nearly the pronounced nose that we do. It's just a little bump in their face, and they have 2 little kind of diagonal slits right underneath there. Not as god-awful as He Who Should Not Be Named from Harry Potter. It's not that bad, but it's actually a very, if you could imagine poor Michael Jackson's nose as he was getting towards the end of his life and his plastic surgery was giving him difficulties. If you could even flatten it out more, then you would have more of that Arcturian look, okay? So again, they have more narrow mouths. Their faces are oval and their eyes are wider set apart. They are oval eyes and they're just a little bit angled. Okay, so the closest thing that we could think of that our lore on Earth can picture with these beings is we think of the Greys, right? We think of the Greys with the great big bulby heads and the giant bulby eyeballs and the little thin pencil necks and skinny pot bellies or whatever. Now, the Arcturian do not look like that. However, the Greys are an offshoot cousin of the Arcturian, and they are more of what I would call a religious sect of beings, and they separated themselves genetically from Otur, hundreds, over 100,000 years ago. And they've been living on craft. They don't believe in living on a planet. They believe that they are cosmic beings. They live on ships, very, very large ships, and they have been genetically noodling with themselves for hundreds of years, thousands of years, so that they can survive in space with more success. And that's another podcast about the Greys. They're a whole different being, yet they are, at one time, they came from Otur originally. And now they're kind of off doing their own thing. So the Oturan they're not as tall as the folks from Sirius AB. They are tall. They can range anywhere from, a short one would be 6'5", clear up to about 12, 13 feet. And they're thin, they're angular, except for their faces. And they have very long limbs. And the folks from Otur, they have, you ever make the Spock hand? Spock, Star Trek, live long and prosper, Spock. Okay. And the live long and prosper sign, where you take two fingers and you smush them together on the outside, and then you got your thumb sticking out. Now, if you take your two fingers when you're making your Spock sign, and give this a try, and you tuck one finger under the other. So you're making like two pointy little fingers. It looks like two pointy pods and a thumb. That's what the Oturan hand looks like. And only the fingers are quite long. And the thumbs are quite long. And the thumb has kind of a funny little pad on it. So we think of it as three fingers, but it's not like they're writing little tiny scrolls or anything like that. So they don't need teensy-weensy motor functions, although they do get some pretty tiny motor functions out of those 3 digits, I'll have you know. Anyway, that's what they look like, and they're kind of a variegated color. This is another thing that's crazy. I didn't want to be racist. The last time I was speaking with one of these Oturan folks, I didn't want to be racist, but I was so fascinated by their skin color, and I didn't want to seem like a moron and ask them why they had such a varying skin tone. I figured it must be like humans. Lots of different humans of different ethnicities have different skin tone. And the thing that's interesting about the Oturan is they range in color from a peach color, like a really muted peach, to this kind of a mauve gray color. And then we've got ones that are variegated. I'm not kidding you. Green, like a greenish blue, but it really does like a teal to a light lime green. And they'll start out darker on top and blend into a very light green on the bottom, or vice versa. So I'm guessing it must be perhaps an interspecial ethnicity issue. I never asked. Like I said, I didn't want to be racist. How come some of you were peach and some of you were gray and some of you were variegated teal? That's a little rude. So I just figured, that's got to be the case. And there are small physical variations between the different colors of these beings. So I'm, again, guessing that just like human beings, they've got to have different ethnic groups that from different various tribes or whomever survived or whatnot. And I noticed that the variegated ones tend to be the priests and or the holy people or the communicators spiritually. And this is a huge culture spiritually. And what's interesting about the Oturan is they really do keep track of their family lines. And again, I find this fascinating because on Earth in the Eastern cultures, especially in Taoism, we have what is reverence to our ancestors. And Western culture calls that ancestor worship. Yet these folks in the Eastern cultures aren't worshiping the ancestors. They are just calling upon them for strength. In the same way that folks in the Catholic religion would call upon saints for strength, okay? So what's fascinating is that the Oturan have this reverence for family lines and for spirit lines. And this is where this gets really crazy, so hang on. So obviously, we here on Earth, we little mud monkeys down on the earth, we're not the ones starting out being, let me put it to you this way. Very few earthlings, if any, start their life out as a being, as a soul, their very first lifetime on Earth. That's right. We look at people on Earth and think, oh, they're such a young soul, or that person's an idiot, or and we cast all this creepy judgment like we do. However, it's important to note that we don't start out at life number one on Earth because there are too many vortexes here. There are too many off-world cultures that have interspersed not only their genome, yet their traditions here, in addition to our own human traditions here. We are an interconnected species, and that would be so much input for a very brand new soul to try to navigate. So we do have beings that are here for the very first time, yet that is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly rare. And we like to label those folks. We label them as all kinds of things, as having mental disorders or being on the spectrum, or the first time you end up on Earth, it's a freaking dumpster fire down here, okay? You need to have a little work experience before you zip up the old human suit and take up being a human being on Earth. You do, because otherwise it's not going to work. It's going to be a fail, right? So when we look at the different lifetimes that we spend before we become a human, well, where would we spend those lifetimes? Well, considering the fact that this series of podcasts is all about our off-world cousins, obviously these beings have been around for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, most of them millions before us. Again, we're super new on the block, gang. New humans. If we take this into consideration, most people on the planet have had lives off-world. Before we surfed in here and started picking up some lifetimes 30, 40,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, 100 years ago, we came in with a lot of experience in variables because nobody would make it on Earth their first shot out the gate. Well, very few people do. So, why am I talking about this? Because I'm talking about the family lines from Otur and how important those Oturan family lines are. So what am I talking about? Well, let's say you, listening today, had a lifetime on Otur 200,000 years ago, okay? Your family line is going to still consider that you are connected to them, even though you're wandering around in a people suit this time around. Because if you originated on a realm like Otur, which would be a really good place for a first life, it's an old civilization, everybody's interconnected, there is no need to prove the self in order to show autonomy, because one's autonomous actions are not based on money or besting another, they're based on giving back to the collective. And that's so hard for we humans to even get our brains around. It's so hard for us to culturally understand a world that doesn't involve money, stature, or gain. Isn't that weird? And we like to call that a utopia and a this and a that. And believe me, on Otur, they went through horrible wars. They showed me god-awful genocides and extinctions that they went through in order to get to the place that they're at. So it's not like they just ended up that way. I mean, they've gone through it and they made good choices. So make good choices, people. We too can someday be as cool as they are. So what I'm saying is, going back to this past life thing, if you were somebody who spent multiple lifetimes on Oturan and your last name was Smith on that planet, then all of the current Oturan Smiths will have a connection to you. And it could be that you were there 200,000 years ago. It doesn't matter. Again, in the same way that our Eastern cultures hold respect for those who have gone before them, their family members. And again, Western world calls it ancestor worship, but it's not quite that. The folks on Otur also have this very connected, respectful way of reaching out to everybody in their family line. So if you were someone who at one time was Oturan, you may very well see UFOs. You may very well see these saucery craft in the backyard with these lights all over the place. The Oturan craft, although they do have some that are circular, that's more of a Sirius AB thing. They're the ones that tend to be more saucer-like, like a saucer on top and a saucer on the bottom. And that has to do with the way that their technology works and the way that they travel. And sometimes they have circular ships, yet even then, they do have panels, and their technology will create what we see as lights in the sky, whereas the Sirius AB craft, they just glow. Like their whole entire craft is just one big glowing orb. The folks from Arcturian, their craft will look like they have lights that sparkle around the outside rim. So if you are somebody who spent time on Arctur at one time or another, you may run into these craft more than somebody who spent time on Sirius, or more than somebody who is from a different starseed family, okay? Or you're just somebody who's really cool and attached to the universe and loves to meditate. The Arcturian love that. They'll show right up to you. They'll be like, hey, what's up? How's it going? Good to see you. Rock on with your peaceful self, man. So there's so much about the Arcturian people that are beings that I think is so fascinating. And I've dealt more with them in person than I have the folks from Sirius. You know, I've tried to talk to the folks from Sirius on occasion, and we have a few passing conversations, but I'm not heady enough for them. Maybe I spent time on Arcturian at one time in some life. I don't know. Yet the Arcturian culture makes a little more sense to me because they are telepathically connected. And they're shaman people, they're priests, wear this chest piece that's super fascinating. I mean, their chest piece, it's this gold kind of half moon looking thing. And we see reflections of that on human beings from Sumeria, ancient Sumeria, the Middle East. You look at some of the ancient Sumerian engravings, and it shows these saucers of beings, you know, with the more flat-featured faces and the very fine noses that are just two little slits and the little bitty mouths and the almond-shaped tipped eyes, not big bulgy eyes like the Greys, but just kind of wide-set almondy eyes and bald heads. You'll see them in carvings, in the Sumerian carvings, and the Sumerian priests end up wearing a lot of those same chest pieces that were this moon shape and made out of gold. Well, keeping in mind they're not big on gold on Arctur, but they have this alloy thing that looks goldish and is everywhere. So when you think about, you know, the Bible, and you think about the heavens are full of cities of gold that gleam. The first time I actually got a good look through a space-time portal, that's a long story for another day, but at actually the Arcturian realm, it freaking looked like a 1950s movie set that was glowing this goldish gray in one of their particular sunsets. And the light on Arcturian is not as direct as our sunlight. It's kind of over the horizon. So it's this sideways light. It always kind of looks peachish or a little yellow, and then it goes to kind of a pinkish at night. It's the way that their sun is. It's an older star than ours, so it casts off more of a reddish light. So it's always kind of a reddish hue over there, not like Mars, but it's very interesting. So when I saw this city, and they were showing me this psychically as well as I got a chance to just take a look at it through some space-time portals, it looks like it shines. It looks like a city of gold, you know, and you think of Cortez and all of these particular different explorers that were looking for the fountain of youth in the Americas and seeking a city made of pure gold. And I couldn't help but wonder if some of these ancient explorers happened to bump into the Arcturian, who loved to share their culture, probably showed to these people in the same way I was showed, hey, look where we're from. Let me show it to you. They saw this city of gold. They may have thought that it was somewhere across the pond or across the water. And actually, to be truthful, it's not even gold. It's this composite alloy that's very shiny and reflects a lot of the light. And the light that's cast upon it makes this grayish gold composite material look like gold. And it just shines. So I about cracked little green apples when I saw this place. And then I thought about all the cities of gold in the heavens that, you know, the Bible talks about. And then you look at all of the cultures in Sumeria that wear these, or used to wear these chest metal pieces that look like a half moon over their chest. The Oturan priests, or holy people, I shouldn't call them priests, they're holy people, they're conduits, wear those as well. And for some reason, I was just getting to this. They're more the variegated folk, and I don't know if that's just a cultural thing or they leave that priesthood. Maybe there's a genetic content in those folks that makes them more predisposed to channeling. I don't know. I didn't want to seem racist, so I just didn't ask a lot of questions based on skin tone, but maybe I'll go there. It was very fascinating. So when I see the effect that the Oturan have had on human culture and ancient culture, it's even more vast, really, than the culture that Sirius had put down upon us. And Sirius was pretty big. I mean, with the step pyramids, the regular pyramids, the Nazca lines, I mean, we're looking at a big imprint there from them. Yet we have more in common emotionally, even though we don't look nearly as much like them. We have more emotionally in common with the Oturan than we do with the folks from Sirius. Folks from Sirius can be a little cold to my taste, just a little cool. I'm sure they're lovely in their own way, but we're such a collective species as human beings that the Oturan, they're also a collective species, so I kind of relate with them maybe, just on a basic level better, okay? So getting back to their craft, if you see any craft that, again, look like they have sort of swimming lights around the outside hull, that is an Oturan craft, as opposed to a big glowing orb, which typically is a Sirius AB craft. And again, just different technologies. And what creates that swimming light? It's not exactly like they have Christmas lights all the way around the hull. Okay, what's going on is that one of those hulls is going one direction, and there is a hull on the inside that's going the opposite direction. And again, we're talking a composite material that is semi-ferromagnetic, but also has the ability, makes it magnetized, which also has an ability to not only take in energy, but to disperse it in a certain way to create an atmosphere around the ship. And, we see this technology also instituted with the Sirius AB craft. Yet the way in which the folks from Otur pilot their ships and the way that they operate, the ships are slightly different. And so the way that the outer energetic force field, we're going to call it, because apparently we're back in 1946 in my terminology. However, the force field that's generated by the two contrary rotating hulls in their ships, it literally creates a static field, or a field that when it rubs against our atmosphere creates harmonics. It creates light. It's energy displacing itself. And I want you to think about the aurora borealis as our example here. Okay, so obviously, the northern lights, that's just radiation from the sun skipping across the magnetosphere of the earth and creating this light show because it's friction. It's friction on our atmosphere that shows up in the northern hemisphere during certain parts of the year. Okay, so in the same manner, what we're looking at in the Oturan ships is as their hulls are spinning, they are creating an exterior hull. And like we talked about in the last podcast, it's like a hull of a ship. You might have this million, zillion ton metal ship floating in water because it's displacing the water. Well, in this same way, they have a similar technology to create a hull of energy that is repellent against our natural gravitational pull. The thing about it is the Oturan ships have this aurora borealis effect that tends to clump up around the outer rim of the ships. So you see this swimming light pattern, and it looks, we think of it as lights, but they're not actually lights. They are refractive energies. Like, remember when you were a little kid and you would get fuzzy socks on and you drag your feet, you drag your feet across the carpet, and then you would touch someone and you'd watch the pop, the spark happen, and your friend goes, ow, quit it. But you would do it in the dark so you could see the transference of energy snap to your friend. So what we're looking at with the lights from the Oturan craft, it's really a transference of energy. It's a friction issue, just like the aurora borealis, that's generated by their anti-gravity or their zero buoyancy, their zero gravity technology. It's not anti-gravity. It's perfect buoyancy technology is what it is. So those are just, a couple of little mini pieces that really set apart the Sirius AB folks from the folks who are from Oturan. And the Oturan are, they don't come and go they do come and go from Earth quite a bit, yet their technology is also biologically attached to them. Whereas some of the Sirius AB technology is biologically informed. However, there literally is in these ships from Oturan, there are components that are more biological that interface with the drivers. And these craft, because of the biological components in them, and again, there's a lot of our off-world cousins pepper in this type of technology, just like a lot of airline manufacturers use different transistors, What we see with Oturan is they are such a consciousness-driven culture that if you do use that Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, that CE5 protocol that I talked about in the last podcast, if you download the CE5 app and it talks about meditating and opening your heart and showing these beings where you are and all these things, they will come and visit you because they literally have a consciousness radar. That's what I would call it. I mean, they actually understand how to survey the quantum field, gang, and how to pull information through that where hearts are glowing or consciousness is glowing. And I can kind of see how maybe ancient peoples might have mistaken the Oturan as angels. I mean, here's this chariot coming down. You think of Ezekiel, the book of Ezekiel in the Bible, which is basically a documented UFO sighting. And this is just so rich, it deserves a read, okay? So if you pick up the Bible, there's lots of weird stuff. There's giants in there. There's elementals in there. We run across the elementals when Cain kills Abel, and then Cain gets kicked out of the Garden of Eden. And it says in the Bible in Genesis, and Cain went to go live with the people in the mountains. Well, who the hell are they if Adam and Eve are the first people, right? So here we have this delicious description of UFOs, okay? So I'm going to read it. It's Ezekiel 10:9 through 14, okay? And it says, I looked and I saw beside the cherubim, which were types of creepy-looking angels with eyeballs on their wings and alien-y things, basically. I looked and I saw beside the cherubim 4 wheels, one beside each of the cherubim. The wheels sparkled like topaz. And we were just talking, right, about how these craft sparkled. So I'll continue. As for their appearance, the 4 of them looked alike. As they moved, they would go in any one. This is so interesting. As they moved, they would go in any one of the 4 directions the cherubim faced. So they were, gyroscopes. They could basically move along with these little alien beings that were walking with them, okay? You really should read about cherubim. They're funky. They're weird. Anyway, I continue. The wheels did not turn about as the cherubim went. The cherubim went in whatever direction the head faced without turning as they went. And the cherubim have 4 different faces on one head. Just keep that in mind because that's normal, right? Anyway, their entire bodies, including their backs, their hands, and their wings, were completely full of eyes, as were their 4 wheels. I heard the wheels being called the whirling wheels. Each of the cherubim had 4 faces. One face was that of a cherub, the second the face of a human being, the third the face of a lion, and the fourth the face of an eagle. So obviously these beings were pretty funky looking, okay? And they were moving along with these gyroscopic glowing craft, a wheel within a wheel way in the middle of the air. That's Ezekiel. So that's the Old Testament. And you got to remember, we're talking about tribes that were wandering about in the Middle East. And Sumeria was huge, huge for talking about the beings that would come from light. They would come from above and they would bring in all sorts of wisdom. And there were priests who, again, wore this funny sort of half moon shaped chest piece, which I'm sure they were emulating some of the folks from Oturan. It's really amazing when I see this. So obviously we're documenting star people all over the place in different types of religions here on Earth, as well as what people saw. And people were trying to make the best sense they could out of a flying machine or a flying wheel or a flying ball or this fourth dimensional thing. And these beings that were covered in eyes, in these glowing eyes. So what I think is very interesting about that is there are beings that require adaptive technology to be able to survive in our world. And what's fascinating is that the Oturan would have these particular suits that have I don't want to call it a tail, but it's something that drags off of it, and it somehow attenuates the atmosphere. Their atmosphere is very different than ours. Our atmosphere is very thin compared to their atmosphere. So for them to breathe here, that's kind of tough. They need something that's going to translate our air. And from what I can tell, these little suits that they will wear or have worn in the past have maybe a hose, or it's a kind of a component that is some sort of I'm going to guess it's like a tailpipe. Now that's probably completely wrong. However, I do know that it does something with translating not the air coming in, but them breathing out. It does something and recycles it somehow. And what I think is fascinating is when you see cave paintings, especially in this area of the country in Montana, you can see these beautiful pictographs that literally show these bubble-headed beings with very long arms, long bodies. That's what the Oturan look like. And they have these funny long bodies and squatty legs. And actually, their legs aren't squatty at all. But a lot of the way that these suits fit makes them look like the MC Hammer pants, that attach at the knees. And again, I've never been in one, so I'm not quite sure what's going on in there. However, there is this side hose that comes off the side. And my sister-in-law, Melissa Siana, who I've had on the show a number of times, she runs Vintage Apothecary and she's a healer and does all kinds of really cool stuff. She's an herbalist. We just took a group of people in Montana on a walk outside to show them these pictographs that were drawn by ancient peoples as well as drawn by elementals to show them how UFOs were documented by ancient peoples. And it's a place in Montana called Valley of the Shields. And of course, to Western eyes, a circle drawn on the side of a piece of sandstone is a shield. It's a shield. Look at its shield. Unless you've actually seen these craft, which I have numerous times, and they are dead ringers. They're dead ringers for certain types of alien craft that have landed out in that area, including but not limited to the drawings of these long-bodied beings, bubble-headed beings with long arms with a funny little tail coming out, which again is this oxygen to whatever they're breathing transitional thing. And I don't know that they actually use that technology anymore. I think they've advanced way past that. Yet when I was shown what these suits were, this was something that they were wearing 2,000 and 3,000 years ago to come down here and do what they needed to do. So their technology has advanced as well. So I don't know if they're still wearing those little tail suit things or not. However, that is a telltale piece of Oturan technology. So if you just know a little bit about our off-world folks, you can begin to see where our human cultures have really picked up a lot from our off-world cousins as far as indoctrinating us with spiritual teachings, with agricultural teachings. And of course, gang, of course, human beings, we're an adaptive species, okay? We're a very smart species. And of course, we're going to figure certain things out ourselves. It's not like we were just sitting there being super stupid And then here comes the aliens, and ooh, we're fabulous now. Yet over time, all of our galactic cousins, gang, all of them have borrowed from cultures before them. It's the way of galactic and cultural evolution. And we are part of that galactic family. So we are not separate from the contributions that these beings have made to us. We are not separate from it at all. And I would encourage you to look online because there's better documentation of the Oturan physically than there are of, say, the folks from Sirius AB. We do have documentation of them, but we're going to see them in Egyptian pictographs and petroglyphs. And we are going to see, carvings. They didn't exactly carve into caves in Egypt. They carved into stone. However, we can also see what they looked like in the Incan takes on what these beings looked like. You know, the thicker features, the larger brow, the larger lips, the larger nose, the larger chins. That's a big Sirius AB thing, as opposed to the fine features and barely any nose at all of the Oturan. And they don't have ears that stick out. They have little bitty nubby ears because they don't do a lot of hearing physically. They do a lot of hearing through what we would call the pineal gland. They have a different brain than we do, but it's a gland in the front part of their brain structure that hears energies and pays attention to those energies and shares those energies, okay? So, I mean, this is big stuff. And one of the things that I would tell you is that if you Google UFOs and cave paintings, you're going to see bubble-headed beings with great big eyeballs in France, and that's more the grays. And we'll cover them in another podcast. They're a little creepy. To me, I mean, then again, that sounds super racist also, and I don't mean to be that way. We as humans have the least in common with them than with the folks from Sirius or the folks from Oturan. So, you know, you're also going to find these long, tall, skinny beings with smaller almond eyes and just kind of slits for a nose and slits for a mouth. And that's our folks from Oturan. And they still do come here very regularly. Their craft, oftentimes, when you see them flying in our lower atmosphere, kick off a more reddish or orangish color. And again, that has to do with their propulsion technology, as we talked about, and the type of hull dynamics that create that overring or that sparkle or that swimming look. So, you know, when you're dealing with looking at cave paintings that represent different types of ships, a lot of times what you see are the Sirius AB ships. You see these glowing round ships that have glowing lights on the bottom of them, because keep in mind, if I'm an indigenous individual and I'm looking up and a ship is landing on top of my head, I'm looking at 4 ports of light, which is part of their propulsion technology, and they're coming straight down on me. So that's what I draw. Okay. Now, if I'm looking at that as a flat picture, it's going to look like a shield with 4 circles on it. Except if you look, the shield has little lights, like little glowy things all over it. So it's really fun to look at our ancient pictographs and see our off-world cousins portrayed there. And, you know, that gets really crazy because we also have elementals that draw pictographs, and the Crow culture, the Crow Nation here in Montana, calls them ghost drawings. And the ghost drawings they're not ghosts, they're elementals, but elementals can cross between planes of existence, right? So they could be like a ghost. But you can tell the ghost drawings because the elemental drawings, they always look like weirdo sea creatures that you just can't figure out. You're like, what is this multidimensional weird squid that had a baby with a jellyfish doing on the wall of a sandstone wall in the middle of Montana with no sea? And that's indicative more of the elemental beings and what they're seeing in their multiverses. But again, that's another podcast. So I hope today we covered the Oturan. They are huge contributors to our collective species. They are all about peace, love, and harmony. And if you ever hear me say, I invoke the law of love, I got that from my Oturan friends. And it's a hand gesture too. Like, like with your left hand, if you can put two fingers up like Scout's Honor, okay, and you take that about shoulder height, and with your right hand, do the Scout's Honor sign, but put it directly out in front of you, like you were gonna do a high five, but you're not. You're putting your hand flat, and somebody's gonna give you a 2-finger five, but you're on the bottom. All right, that hand position means I invoke the law of love. That is a universal greeting that the Oturan use, and it is a consciousness flag. Like you're saying, look, no matter what, I'm going to adhere to the rules of love. I'm not going to be a jerk. I'm not going to be an asshat. I'm going to be in higher consciousness. I'm going to be in the highest octaves of who I am to operate. And I was taught this hand signal by the Oturan through a series of, they like to put people through dream exercises because they're trying to teach us how to let go of our fears. And for whatever reason, I was on their radar for this series of dream exercises. And the first couple of them, I finally succeeded in putting my fear to rest. And when I was confronted in this fear scenario, in this /dreamscape, whatever it was, there was this terrifying looking alien monster thing coming at me that was going to eat my face off. And I literally just went into this hand gesture and I said, I invoke the law of love. And the whole entire simulation just stopped, and standing right in front of me was this Oturan being, just looking me eye to eye. And it had on this white, I'm sure it wasn't terry cloth, okay? It wasn't 1972 on Otur, but it looked like a terry cloth-ish sort of like material, and it was this robe, and it had that short Nehru collar, and they do have more thin necks, but not skinny like a gray. And there was this Nehru collar, and it had some sort of like embroidery or very, very subtle, same type of color embroidery on it, just the color portion. And this being just stood there. And its entire message was very much like, good job, way to go. You overcame your fear, you got in your higher octaves, and you passed. And they left me alone for a while, then they started running me through some other drills, but in the drills, they threw in my wife and my daughter and put us all in peril together. I didn't do so good keeping my head level there. I kind of went a little throw a rock mammal. I kind of went into my beat you on the head with rock person because I was, I went into this protective mammalian thing with my family, and all of those ended up just with me waking up. And I mean, they're not there to make fun of me, but I could just energetically hear this, like, you failed out on that one, kid. And since then, they haven't really hit me up. So maybe I failed out of Oturan college. I don't know. Or maybe they were just trying to show me where my instincts would kick in over my energetic ability to be in that high octave to ward off fear. I don't know. But either way, I've been getting a break from my nightly Oturan lessons. Yet I wanted to tell you about these folks because they do, like I said, inform so much of our human culture, and we have a lot in common with them. So if you want to communicate with the Oturan, just sit quietly, envision your place where you live, see it like in a Google map, zoom in on that in your mind's eye, and send it out to these beings because, again, their ships are interfaced with a bioengineered type of hull that picks up vibration and emotion. It's the best way I can tell you, out of the quantum field. I mean, their technology is beyond what we could even imagine having. It's pretty amazing. And they can basically just fold space and be right where you are all at one time while they're traveling where they're going because they have a deep command of space-time and how it works. So anyway, this is just a very light tutorial on Otur and the Oturan, and I hope you look up some of these pictographs online. I hope you search out some of these Sumerian pictures. And you know that hand gesture with the 2 fingers up and the 2 fingers out? You really want to trip yourself out? Google Jesus and Saints UFO paintings and look at all the stuff that comes up. From the 1100s forward, you'll see pictures of saints with the 2 fingers up and the 2 fingers out, and way up in the corner there is painted a frickin' UFO. Sometimes it's Mary, sometimes it's Jesus, and a damn UFO. I'm not kidding. And it's not like, oh, it's a blob of paint. If I squint my left eye and stand on my right toe and spin in a semicircle, it can look like a UFO. No, it's a freaking UFO, like a flying saucer with lights coming off of it and beams coming out of it. Google it, check it out. And they've got these hand signals. So our off-world cousins have been talking to us about spirituality for a long time. And we live in such a complex, vast world, gang. Whenever you get too tied up on what's going on with politics and this and that, remember we are in a cultural shift spiritually. And that's why I've chosen to bring forward this series of off-worlder educational podcasts, because it's time we put ourselves vibrationally above the fray. There are still humans here that want us to go backwards evolutionarily and genetically and all kinds of things, and that's just not going to happen. So the way to get around that fear is to get into our higher octaves. I invoke the law of love. When the bull crap is hitting the fan, I invoke the law of love. When your heart is breaking because you're watching governments do very unethical things, I invoke the law of love. It resets the energy field around you and it resets your energy. So you go invoke the law of love and you do your best to affect that quantum field and bring in phenomenal change wherever you are. And you may just run into some of our Oturan cousins while doing it because they love to ping it. Your little ping device on your tagged sea turtle self will show up and they might be like, hey, rock on, dude. High five to you, or finger five, or whatever we do. Okay, gang. There you go. Have fun Googling, and I will see you next podcast.